right? Let's take the fourth activity. So the fourth activity here was actually this hijacking thing. So just to recap what this is doing, if I just refresh this, you can search whatever you want to search on Google or YouTube, whatever, by just typing anything in these boxes, in these forms, if you may, that we have just created in this website. So I can just say something like dog, like that, and it's going to search. Whenever I hit enter or click search, it's going to be opening Google on this kind of value that we have entered inside that box, right? And remember, this queue is called a query string, and this is the most important part in any form that you are going to deal with. So I just hope that on Moodle that you have watched the frames. It's not really frames, it's forms. I just made this by mistake, so it's forms. I hope that you watched the forms video here in Moodle in the URL. If you did, just come back here and let's see how can we do that. So just neglect these buttons. There is no need for these buttons to be there. I don't know, I don't remember why did I include them, but it's just there. We don't really need them. We're not going to work with them anyways. So this is the font, and this is basically an underline here, and this is an HR. So let's just start with what we know. So let's just create a folder first, and let's just call it activity 4, right? And I just want to have the naming convention the same, so they stack on the same vertical line here. So I'm just going to say create an index.html, right? And I'm going to create a new CSS file, right? And let's say that this CSS file is going to be named as styles.css, and I want them to be at the same folder, where is it, as activity 4, right? So they are at the same place. Now we can just create our HTML template, and let's say that we are going to include that styles.css, styles, right? You can name it anything, styles, like that. So it's the same name here, and I'm just going to say this is hijacking websites, or just say famous websites. Okay, so let's start off with this h1. I think this is an h1, right? So let's say that this is going to be forums, hijacking websites, forums, and I'm going just to have a REC just to denote that this is a recording version, so I can differentiate between the one that I'm working on and the actual target that we are trying to simulate. So forums hijacking websites, right? Something's wrong here. It's hijacking, yeah. Okay, so this is the first start. Let's just open up the live server and go to our lab activity, activity 4, and here it is. That is it, right? So first of all, let's give some fonts here. So I'm just going to say that universally I'm going to use a font that is really cool. I think I've used it all over this place. So this font is actually a font called Nunito. So I'm just going to search for Nunito on Google Fonts, or you can just open Google Fonts and just type in this search bar here whatever font that you are willing to search for. So this is Nunito. I'm going to pick the one that has a like, for example, this is good to me, so I'm just going to select this style, right? Copy this part. This is not the first time actually we do this, so I'm going to put that link in my HTML, because any links or settings is in our head, in the head. This is the settings area. Okay, so these two links are from Google Fonts. However, we can just say that universal selection any element is going to give a font family of Nunito, and notice that anything that we pick externally, like anything that we link externally from a service like Google Fonts, you need to put it between double quotes. But if it's something that is defined on the machine, right, this is a built-in font on most of the machines, you do not have to wrap it between double quotes. So I'm just going to use Verdana as a rollback font, and the main font is going to be Nunito. All right, so let's see if this is making any difference. It is making a difference actually, so that's it. And let's say that the H1, actually the H1 is not Nunito. If you look here, the H1 is I believe this is monospace, so I'm just going to pick monospace. So I'm just going to overwrite this universal selector on the H1 for a font family of monospace, and let's just take a look here now. Alright, so we are getting there. Okay, Now we can give it an underline, right? So an underline actually is a text decoration kind of thing. So you can just say underline, and we can say this is going to be wavy and give a color. Okay, let's take a look here, and here it is. So let's just try to imitate this as much as possible. This is like something like a purple color, so I'm just going to say purple, right? Okay, so we are getting there, right? It's not that beautiful actually, so I'm just going to pick a lighter version. Bear with me. Let's just delete that purple and Control S, go back. Here we have this. I think I'm satisfied with this so far, so let's just continue with the rest. So I'm just gonna go there and add a BR, a line break, and then a horizontal line just to simulate this part here. And I don't think that we need a line break actually. Alright, so this is gonna do the trick. Now let's make a division for every form out of these, right? So say we have 3 forms, so we have logically 3 divisions, right? So I'm just going to create a division, and this division, if you look closely, the first form is about Reddit, so the second is Google, and the third is YouTube, right? So I'm just going to say that the first division is going to be having a class of Reddit. You might wonder what is the difference? Like all of them are styled the same, so do we really need to have like different classes for the same kind of styling? That's a good point. So you know what, I'm just going to name it like, or let's just stick to the convention here, so just we know what we are actually doing. But that point is correct, since all of the stylings in every form is the same. There's no point in grabbing every div and giving it a different class than the other, but I'm just going to go for it for this time. Okay, notice that you can have a very big container, like a class or a div that contains all of these, right? And in fact I might actually do that. So let's say that or let's just stick to this convention here, and I'm going to show you how can you do like a big container that contains everything. So let's say that this one is going to be YouTube. Okay, and let's create a form now, right? So we have a method and an action and a class. In the previous video that I've linked on Moodle, I didn't actually talk about the methods get or post. In this one I'm going to talk about get and post. So the default one I believe that you've seen in the video or the URL was get, so I'm just going to have it as get here, and I'm going to tell you what is the difference between get and post in just a minute. Okay, so just recapping what happened in the previous video, and please, if you didn't watch it, please make sure to watch it. The action is basically the destination where you want to have your values being sent to, right? So the values that we are going to type in our forms, specifically in our input fields, you just have one input field per form here. So any value that you are going to write in this input field, whenever you hit submit or search or whatever this button is doing, but definitely this button is going to be a submit button. Again, if you don't understand what this means, just go back to the video, all right, the URL here. Okay, so whenever we submit any value in the input field, these values are what is being sent to the action, to the destination. So this means that if I am doing something like cats here and I just choose this and hit submit or search, the action is this link. So this basically, this is the link that I have it here in this action, all right? And the value is whatever we have entered in our input field right there, right? So this is really important. And the action doesn't have to be an external website, as you're gonna see whenever we get to PHP, right? The action doesn't have to be an external website. It can be an internal file. It can be something like app.php. Whenever we get to PHP, we're gonna do something like that. So the action can be something like this. So we're taking any values that is going to be entered by the user in the input fields, and whenever that user hits submit button, right, these values that he entered in the input field is going to be sent to that destination or to that action, right? But we are going to stick to the methodology of having the action as an external website. So let's just start with Reddit here. So I'm just going to include Reddit. Where do we get? Let's just say Reddit. Okay, so I'm just going to include this. Okay, and this is my action. This is where the values should be sent to, right? That's not the complete URL, but we are going to see this in just a minute. Well, you just want to complete the UI, right? So things looks beautiful, and then we are going to dive deeply in what this means, right? All right. So let's continue this, and let's leave the method as I said as get. Right. Let's use the headphones, and we are gonna see what does this method mean. But all you need to know is that for the time being, there is an attribute or a property called method, and it has this value, the get value, right? And we have the destination, and I'm not really going to give the form any special styling, so I'm just going to leave the form class as it is. And even if I'm going to give that form some special styling, I think that the forms, all of the forms, are going to be having the same styling all over the page, right? So there is no special form out of the three, right? So all of the forms are the same. So I'm just going to leave the class as it is, right? So let's say that we are going to make an input field, right? And this input field is just going to contain some text, right? And let's give it a name, and this is the most important part, right? So let's just give it a name, something like search. Let's say that this is going to be something like, for example, we are searching for some results, right? So let's just say that this is going to be search value, right? And the value here is not really necessary, okay? So let's just take a look on the current web page. I'm just going to remove all of these. Right, so this is the input field, right? Looking pretty ugly, right? So if I put something in the value, that's not something that you would typically want in this kind of input field. So something like this, for example, type some values. All right. So you are going to see that this is not a placeholder, right? So this is the actual value inside that text field. And in order to type something inside that text field, in order to override it, you're just gonna need to manually remove everything as a user and type whatever you want to type. And this is really annoying, right? So instead of giving a fixed or absolute value to the value field, we would want the user to have his own freedom and type whatever comes to his mind, right? And whatever value that the user will enter, this actual value is what's going to be stored inside this empty string here, inside this value property. And this is what we are going to use, right, in order to search for the specific kind of value. So for example, if the user enters something like cats, right, and there is going to be a button in just a minute that we are going to create, if the user hit on that button, hit on that submit button, right, this value cats is going to be accompanied with the name that we have set here, right? So some kind of concatenation is going to be happening behind the scenes like that. So we have said that the name here, or the search value that the user will enter, which is going to be actually saved inside this empty string, inside this value property from this interface here. So whatever the user is going to be entering and hitting submit, this value is going to be stored here, and this value is going to be in conjunction concatenated with that name, and our name happened to be search value. So this is going to be something like this behind the scenes. For example, if we entered the value as cats, or if the user who is using our website entered the value as cats and hit submit, this value is going to be stored as the value for the name. It's going to be stored as the value for the name that we have personally chosen. This name is just arbitrary. We can make it anything, right? So this is something that is going to be formulated behind the scenes, and this is what we are going to really rely on whenever we want to receive these kind of values into our destination. Whether this destination is a PHP file, an external link, as you're going to see in a minute, it doesn't really matter. So let's just say that this is the kind of setup that we are going to have. I'm going to have a property called required, and this is a I don't know if it's called valueless. It doesn't have a value here, so just required like that. And this means that we need to write something. We can't skip this empty, right? We can't just submit whatever comes to our mind and this is an empty string. It does need to have a value, right? So I'm just going to have another input field, and this is going to be a submit type of input, right? So let's just take a look on this. So a submit type of input is just basically a button, but what really matters is that it needs to have a type submit. Please watch the previous video on the forums in order to understand what I'm talking about. So it needs to have the type submit kind of thing, right? And here the value makes a difference, because the value is going to tell you what does this button actually do. So let's say that we are going to write something like submit, right? So this is what's going to be appearing inside our button, okay? And notice how the inputs are just stacking on one line next to each other, because they are, you guessed it, they are in line level elements. You can just tell that they are in line by just putting your highlighter there. So they are in line, they're taking the width of the actual thing here. Anyways, so we can just make it something that is of value. The value that we write inside our button, it needs to be something meaningful to the user. Submit, or in this case, if we are searching for something, let's just make a search, right? And I think this is going to do it for us, right? Now, one last thing is that you do not know what you are searching for. Like, what is this field for? You can modify this in two ways. The first one, actually they are used in conjunction. The first one is to have in our input text type what we call a placeholder, to tell the user that something intuitive that he can use or he can type in order to know what these kind of values or what these kind of fields are waiting for him to enter. So type in a value to search for. I think this is too much. Yeah, we are going to modify the width and everything via CSS in just a moment, but notice that this placeholder, it just gets removed whenever you type something. Okay, the other part that you need to specify is that for this specific input field, input text field here, right, we can just say that we are going to have a label, right? What is this for? I'm going to tell you this in a minute, but let's say that the label is going to be, for example, search Reddit, something that is still intuitive to the user. So here we know, or a user who opens this site is going to be understanding that this values that he is going to be entering inside this input field is for searching in, for example, Reddit, right? So this for is basically for linking, because at some point, if you watch the previous video, you're going to see that you will have multiple inputs and multiple labels, right? So just let's save this. So how can you differentiate? How can you differentiate that this label, for example, is for this input? It's not only because I placed them like right after the other. I can just have this in any place in our code. You would find programmers who does this all the time, right? This is not good for readability. That's not good coding practices, but you would find people doing this. So in order to specifically say that this kind of label is related to this kind of input field, we can just use what's called as a for property. So for here is targeting the input field with its ID. And you're gonna wonder, where is the ID? And this is the part that we are going to add right now. So I'm just going to add an ID of, let's say, Reddit, okay? Or let's say search Reddit, okay? So, or let's say just input Reddit, right? So because this is an input field by the end of the day, right? So input Reddit is going to be hooked up with the for property from the label. So we're just gonna making a way of linking the label with the input field via its ID that we have just given, right? Okay. And it's not gonna do anything, by the way, to this interface, but for us as programmers, this is really important. All right. So let's just test this, right? Let's put some values inside this input field and hit submit. Okay, so let's just say cats, and remember it goes to Reddit, right? So let's just say cats and search. Notice two things. The first one is that our link has happened, or the external link has opened in place, right? It didn't open a new tab, and this can be easily solved from a target property, and note that the target is a property that is given to the form itself, right? So you can just say that we want to open this in a new tab, right? And remember that the target, we used to see the target in anchor tags. Remember this? When we say that, for example, if we have a link here, something like google.com, right? So you can just add a target here to open whatever. So this is just some text, go to Google. You can just say target, and this is going to be opening this website in a new tab, right? But you need to have HTTPS at the beginning. But anyways, it's the same property. So let's just test this one more time. So this is the first thing to observe. So search, I think we need to refresh this. All right, so search, it's going to be opening in a new tab. That's the first thing to observe. The second thing, notice this here. Okay, this is the name, right? This is the query string, right? The query string, if you remember at the beginning of the video, it was called as Q, right? And these are just websites preferences. Some query strings which are used, this is basically, if you remember what I told you in the beginning of the first lab, right? Our first lab in the semester, I told you that the query string is what really links the HTML portion with our backend. So this is what really links our HTML. So this is the value that we have took from the input field from here, right? And we have hooked up this value to the name that has been written in front of our input text field. So this name, or this input text field, had a name of search value, and this is what has been taken from the value and being hooked up to, right? So we've made some kind of pairing between the value that the user will enter, right, and the actual name that we personally provided, right? Okay, so this is what we call a query string. How do you know that this is a query string? Basically, in any URL, if you saw any question mark like that, this means a query string. So anything that starts with a question mark and some kind of a key pair values, right? This is a query string, right? Some websites, as you've seen in the beginning of this video, has the query string, has the name parameter as Q, right? Some websites has it as query string like that, right? Some websites has the query string being named differently, and this is dependent on the actual programmers or the actual back-end programmers who, like, it's their naming convention, right? In our case, our query string, this is basically the query string in our case. That's the value, that's the key value of our query string. We just decided to have it named as search value. Okay, that's our personal choice. Okay, but there is one slight problem. Okay, if you look here, we want to search Reddit, right? So whenever you hit search, it just opens up Reddit. It just opens up Reddit, like it doesn't do anything. Like these values, this query string is being hooked up to the URL, but the website does not utilize it at all. So how can we make use of this value? How can we actually take this value and tell Reddit, hey, using your own query string that happens to be something like Q or query string or whatever name that you give it, or that the programmers of Reddit has decided to give it, right? Take this value and put it internally or automatically put this value in your search bar and just get me results of cats, right? So let's see how actually Reddit deals with searches. So if I'm in Reddit and I want to search something, I just can type in the search bar cats and hit enter, and notice the most important part. Look at how the URL is formed, right? Notice that starting from the question mark, right? This is your start of the query string, and this is what is going to be sent from our HTML, right? So this is one thing to note. The cats is the value that we can put, or the user can put, in our text field, right? We cannot control the value here, but we certainly can control the actual name of the query string. So instead of having our query string named as search value, which does not really help at all with Reddit, right? So Reddit cannot really utilize any value coming in a key or a query string that is called search value, but Reddit can make stuff useful. Reddit can make values useful, the values that are coming from text boxes or input fields. It can utilize it if the query string was Q, right? So Q here is the query string, or is the name of the query string that Reddit uses, right? So this is the first thing to notice. The second thing is the URL is not only www.reddit.com, not like this, but it has another route, it has another section, which is basically the search. So if we did something like that, if we modified the URL to be the reddit.com plus the search route here, and if we said that the name that is going to be sent to this action, to this destination, the minute that we hit the submit button, right, if the name was actually Q, which happens to be the query string or the key that Reddit actually identifies and knows, right, this means that any value that the user will enter inside this input text field is going to be hooked up with this key. And once this hookup is done, once this pairing is done, now Reddit is going to be formulating a URL that looks like this. It's going to take that Q, it's going to put, by default, it's going to put that like kind of question mark or the start of the query string, right? And it's going to put this kind of pair right there. And once this URL is formed, you're gonna find yourself being transferred into an interface like that and to a search result page on Reddit that is having internally this cat's value by default, right? So let's try this one more time. Okay, so let's just save this and refresh, and let's search for Raspberry Pi, for example, and hit search. Notice how now this URL that has the route of search is opening with a query string starting with the question mark that has our name, right? That has the name Q, which is the query string that Reddit recognizes for searching, right? And the value that the user has entered inside the input field, right? And notice how the white spaces are represented with plus signs for concatenation. Okay, so this is for Reddit. Let's see how things are for Google. But before we continue, how about we style this a little bit better? All right, I'm not going to go full commando and styling the whole thing to look like that. I'm just going to make it look a little bit decent. And after another thought, I think I will leave the styling to the end of the video because it's gonna take some time, to be honest. So let's finish the portion for hijacking Google and YouTube to begin with, all right? Before we continue at the other divs and making a div for Google and YouTube, let's just take a look here. So this is our form so far. Okay. And we can do something called a field set. If you watch the videos, you don't understand what is a field set, right? So inside the form, I can just say that I'm going to wrap my stuff here in some kind of a border-like thing, right? Okay, so take a look. Then the field set is giving you this kind of nice border here, and we can go to the styles, and let's say that we can give that field set some kind of a nice color. Let's give it something like I don't know, F4, F7, F8, for example. Let's take a look at this. Well, I don't think that you're seeing this, but it's kind of a very light gray or a bluish gray, some kind of that, right? So this is a very nice color. Okay, and we can add something underneath the field set that is called a legend, right? So a legend, you can just see that there is a small area here. This small portion is just to identify what is this field set for, what is this form is doing. So this form is all about hijacking, just like a title for your form, that's it. So hijacking Reddit. Okay, and this is it. This is your legend. Okay, now we can give that legend just a quick style here. You can just give it a padding of up and bottom 10% or 10 pixels and 15 pixels from right and left, right? And we can give it some kind of a border, and let's choose something that is not so I think we need to give the border 1 pixels, yes, and solid. And now it is going to appear, it's not the most beautiful thing in the world, but I think you can see it. So I'm just going to change the color a little bit. All right, okay. and this is so far, I think these are good for styling so far. Okay. Okay, so let's just put some stylings, just a quick styling. I'm not going to do everything here. Let's give that legend a background color of E4 F 8 F8. I don't really remember the color itself, but it's something like that. Yeah, this would work. Okay, and we can just say that the font of the legend is going to be uppercase. Okay, and let's give it some kind of font weight of 400. Let's just make it 500 then. No effect. 600, and we have something looking good, right? Okay. Let's give this field set some kind of fixed width, right? So let's just say that the width here is going to be something like 600 pixels. Okay, or make it just 700. I'm not sure what is, I think this is 600. I don't want to look at the developer tools, but I think this is, where is the forms? This is the first form. And that is how much? Let's just pick this one. That is a width of 600, almost 600, 624. Okay. So let's say that this is 600 pixels. And what is, something's wrong here. Okay. And let's just make the other forms, right? So let's just make another forms. So this is the form for Reddit. Now this is for Google. Let's see how things are whenever you open Google and search for something like cat, right? Look at the search URL. It's going to be intimidating at first, but let's just try to dissect it here. Alright, so that is way too much talk. You're just going to see that it is the same exact thing as Reddit. You have a Q string of Q. Sorry about the background noise. We can't really control this in Egypt, so. Alright, where do we, alright, here it is, here it is, here it is. Okay, so see this? This is the Q, and that's the query string name here. That's the name of the input field. And that's the value that we have entered in the search bar, So I'm just going to delete everything. And just to tell you that it's the same, I'm going to try it just in a minute. And notice here that this is the route for the searching. That's really important, and that's the beginning of the query string, the question mark. So if I just took the same link and went to my browser and searched, it's gonna give you the same result, right? So we can use this information. So let's say that this is going to be Google URL with the search route included. Right, let's just put a / here, and the query string is called Q as well, right? And I'm going to change the ID to input Google to match the label for it. Input Google. Okay, and this is hijacking Google and search Google. Okay, and that's it, right? So let's try this one, and let's say something like trigram, for example. Search. Oops, something is wrong. So what is going on here? All right, so let's take a look at this. Maybe we should include, maybe we should take this away, this backslash here, right? Because if you remember, I think there was no backslash. It was like something like this, and the query string starts like that. So let's just try to have this without the backslash and try again. Search, or for refresh, I'm sorry. Trigram and search. Yeah, it was the backslash. It was unnecessary. Okay, For some reason it works with Reddit. Here you can just say Raspberry Pi and search. So yeah, there is a / in Reddit here, so that's really important to take care for. I'm just going to copy the same stuff for YouTube. Okay, this is just prepare things first and search YouTube, and this is going to be the same stuff. Alright, and let's see how our searches URLs being conducted in YouTube. Let's say something like the office. Okay, and let's see the search result here. See, now the search route is not called search, it's called results, and the query string is not called queue anymore, it's called search query. Okay, so this is how YouTube conducts their own URLs or routes for searching, right? So as I told you, it depends from a website to the other. Where is our work here? I'm just going to put the link so we know what we are working on. So this is our URL here. Oops, that's the URL. The search query is the name of the input field, not queue anymore. And I think everything is the same. Okay, so let's close all of these. And where is our website? No, let's run the live server one more time. Come on. Okay. Alright. And let's type for YouTube, let's say search for food, for example. And it is working. Okay. Now for the styling bit. Alright. Before getting into the styles, this is the last illustration. I'm just going to have a new div to illustrate what we mean by a post and get methods. Okay, so I'm just going to say that this is going to be an h2 get versus post, right? And let's say that we have an hr. I'm going to remove all of this, by the way. That's just for the time being. I don't really need a class here for this div. And let's say that we want to open something like google.com. Okay, and here I will say that this legend is going to be illustration. Okay, and let's say that we have something like some kind of a login system, right? So we ask the user for username and password. I know that the action doesn't make sense, like why we are sending the username and password credentials to Google. It's not going to do anything. But what really matters is that how are these values being sent to this destination, right? In a week, in this week, I believe, in the next week, we are going to take PHP, and you're going to see that we are going to have our own PHP files that is going to be receiving the credentials from these input fields that we are going to create just in a moment, right? So let's just say that I'm going to have a label for text. Let's say that this is text, right? And I'm just going to say that this is username. Okay, I don't need this ID here, so I'm just going to say that ID is username as well. What really matters is this name here. Okay, so username, and type in your username. Okay, the same thing goes for the password. So the ID and password, like that. The ID is going to be the same. What really matters again is the name here, not the ID. Okay, so type in your password, and this is password, like that. And notice that we need to make the type as password so things do not appear. And let's just say something like login instead of search, right? So let's take a look at that one. Okay, so notice that any values that we are going to write is going to be sent to Google. So let's say something like this and 1 2 3 login. Notice how this is actually like that doesn't seem secure at all for some reason, because all of your credentials are being illustrated in the URL. So this can be like penetrated easily if you have your credentials open in the wild like that, right? And this is what the GET request actually do, right? GET and POST are something called HTTP requests, right? And we are going to talk about HTTP requests in more detail once we get to PHP and backend and databases. But for the time being, you should know that GET request is used to get you something, or to retrieve some data from somewhere, right? So it takes some data with it. In this case, it takes the credentials that we put in our input fields, paired with the names here. Notice that this name here is what we've seen here. I didn't want to go through the same thing because I illustrated this in the previous video, but this is the name and this is the value that we have entered, right? And that's the name, right? That's the name, and this is the value that we have entered. Notice that this ampersand to say that you have like two key value pairs, two pairs, right? So the GET request takes these data and place them somewhere at some destination. In this destination, it happens to be our google.com. It can be our PHP file, as I've mentioned before, right? POST request does the same thing. It takes your credentials or any kind of data that you enter inside the data field, and once you hit the submit type button, right, it takes these data and places them into the destination. But what's really beautiful about the POST is that these data will not be shown in the URL. So let's try this one more time. Okay, and let me just refresh and enter my credentials and 1 2 3 4 and log in. Okay, it can give you this kind of error, right? That's fine, but we just know that the POST has worked perfectly, right? And maybe we can just even try the Wikipedia here. Okay, so I'm just going to say that this is the URL that I'm going to go for. Okay, let's have it as GET first. Okay, so something like that. All right, I think we need to have HTTP. Let's try one more time. Okay, so this is the credentials. Now let's try POST. All right, same stuff, and it works. It takes you to the destination, but you don't have any kind of values, right? Okay, so as a client or as a user who's using this website now, I feel a little bit secure because I don't see my credentials in the URL, right? This is far more better. One last note, actually you can discover what are the credentials even if you are using a POST request from the developer tools, but this needs you to be someone who is really available or who's really aware with web development in general, right? So let me tell you how can you identify the credentials even if you are using a POST method, right? So I'm just going to take away this target blank. I want everything to happen in place, right? So let me just go there, refresh, and enter my credentials 1 to 6 and log in. All right, okay, so if I open my developer tools and I go to, instead of elements, I go to networks. Let me do the same thing while the networks tab is open. So let's just do this one more time. Okay, so let's say 127 login, and notice this. Okay, see the first request that happened to our wikipedia.org or the action or the destination. It tells you that the request method is POST, right? And if you scroll down, you're going to see that this is actually the name of the input field. That's the value that we have entered, and this is the name of the password of the another input field. and that's the value that we have entered. So for someone who's a little bit skilled, if you want to sniff that, even if you are using a post method, this is available. There are other techniques for securing this stuff, but that is a little bit is going to be stretching our scope here, which we are talking about only about forms and styling. When we get to the part where we actually secure our requests to our PHP files, right, maybe we are going to talk about securing this bit. Okay, so let's remove this part and let's see how can we style this. Let's just go to our code here and remove that last part. That was just for illustration. Oops, come on, and let us pick that bad boy. Let's first change this background of the legend. I think it is E4 F8. I think this is better, it's more lighter, right? And let's give the field set a background or a border color, something that is a little bit bluesable than this. Okay, and let's give it a border radius. It doesn't have to be exactly the same as the one that I've made, but something really closer. Oh, that's too much radius. Let's just say that it's going to be 6 pixels. I think this is good, right? And the legend is going to be having the same border radius of 5 pixels. Notice how it's now cornered here. It's not cornered, right? So it's a little bit smoother. And let's have, after each field set or after each div, we would have a margin bottom of 20 pixels. Let's just make it more. Let's just make it 50 pixels. 30 pixels is good, right? And let us pick that search button. How about we pick that first? Let's pick this one. This with the actual what do we call it? The input text field. So we are going to pick the input tag that has a class of or an attribute of type text. So I just want to grab the texts first. This text and this text and this text and so on. Okay, and let's give it a width of let's say 90% of the whole form or division or field set. Right, so remember the division is spanning the entire width. The field set is having a width of 600, as you're seeing here. I don't know if you're seeing here this small number here. Okay, so the width is going to be taking like 90% only, and we have like 10% left. We can give the 10% like a padding of 5% from the left and padding of 5% to the right, right? So we can just say that we are going to give a padding top and bottom. I don't really care about top and bottom, but let us say that top and bottom is going to be something like 15 pixels, right? And from right and left, let's say that these are going to be 5 percentages. I think that we are talking about the margin, so I'm just going to give everything 15 pixels. I think it looks the same so far, but the margin, let's say the margin here from top and bottom, let's say that this is going to be having a 10 pixel top and bottom, and right and left is going to be having 5%. Alright, that doesn't seem to work, so there's a small issue. Let us see what's going on here. So let's just pick this guy. This is it. Okay, so this is the padding, and alright, so if we went to the developer tools one more time, where is it? This is the developer tools, right? So you can just grab this and try to fix that margin. Let's say that this is going to be let's say that is going to be, let's see how this is looking like. So I'm just going to use the developer tools. So margin left is going to be having like 5%, so 5% from there, and let's give it from margin right, something like 2%. Okay. Okay, but what really annoys me is that whenever you give this margin, like you see stuff are actually getting out of the width. Like this is supposed to be within, like this margin is supposed to be within the place, like that's the place of the input. Why does it take outside? Why does it take a margin outside? Right? We can solve this really easily by having an attribute called box sizing and border box. Okay, so what happened there? If we took this away, see how this is looking like? So what is happening with border box is the following. I think we can even increase this to 5. Let's just make it 2 pixels or 2 percentages. So box sizing is basically saying if you want to have any external margins or paddings that can get out of the line, sometimes it can get out of the frame, as you've seen here, like this is literally getting out of the frame. Are you seeing that orange box here is getting out of the field set, right? And we don't want this to happen. So you can have all of your external spacing, whether these external spacing like margins or even if they were internal spacing like paddings, if you want to have them all inclusively happening in the element area, so in the input area here, you can just have something called a box sizing of border box. So border box means that add whatever that you want to add. I'm not going to let anything get out of frame. Okay, so everything is going to be happening inclusive to my element. This is what box sizing means. So everything is contained within, right? So this is what border box means. Okay, so I'm just going to edit this part. So let's say that the margin top and bottom is 5%. Let's just say that margin left is going to be 5%, like the one that we've used on the developer tools. And the margin right is going to be 2%. And let's say that we are going to use a box sizing of border box. And let's take a look. It should give you the same result. Let's just save. And it should give you the same result. Now let's grab this label, right, and give it something like a 5% from the left as well, so they are aligned on the same area, right? So let's just grab the label and give it a margin of left to be 5%, and you should see them like that on the same, starting from the same position. And let's have like some kind of a margin top, so we have a space before the legend here. So margin top of, let's say 20 pixels. Okay, now nothing happened, and I think I know why. Okay, so the reason why this did not work, like if you're seeing here, if I added, let's add a margin right, by the way, and let's just open the developer tools for a second. So the developer tools, if I inspected this label here, you're gonna see that the margin left is actually applying and the margin right is actually also applying. Let me just increase this so it's applying, but the margin top is not taking place. Why is that? That is because this element, the label, is an inline level element, and inline level elements, sometimes margins and paddings get a little bit funky. They do not actually apply to inline level elements at some certain directions. In this case, the margin does not apply from top and bottom because this is inline, right? So يعني نحمد ربنا ان هو بيقبل additions on the left and the right, right? So in order to have this having the same effect from all directions, not only from right and left, we need to make sure that this is a block level element. لازم نحوله block, right? So if we say that this is going to be, I don't need the right, I just wanted to show you what this looks like. So if I display that label as a block level element, now the top margin is going to take effect, right? So if this is the case, let's just give it a bottom as well of 10 pixels, right? And I think this is looking good so far. There's a very annoying black outline to this input text field, so I'm just going to say that there is a property called outline, and we are going to give it a none. It's not taking effect. I think it's not none. It should be, let's say white, for example. All right, let's just hold this for a minute, okay, since we need to actually work on the search as well. Okay, so let's say that the search is going to be having the same stuff. So this is type submit. Notice that this search is type submit, right? So this is going to have essentially the same width, the same margins, the same border box thing. So all of these are the same, right? So actually we can like have this in the same area. So I can just say that using multiple selectors, these are going to be sharing the same stuff. Okay. And I can give that guy a margin bottom of 10 pixels. Okay, I think this is 10 pixels, right? And maybe 15 is good. Okay, and let's do some stuff on the submit button to make it looking a little bit beautiful. So now we can just say that the border is going to be none, right? And let's say that the background color is going to be something green. Okay, and let's give that a text transform of uppercase, and let's give it a font size of 20 pixels. Let's see how 20 pixels, oh, that's really big. So let's say 13 pixels. 16 pixels is 15 is good, right? And let's give it a color of white, and we can do something really cool called letter spacing and give it 1 pixels between each letter and the other. I don't know if you can see this, but it's actually there. So this is letter spacing. I think 2 pixels is good enough. All right. So far we are getting close. Okay. I don't think that we need a border for either the legend or the field set. So let me just go to the border. The legend doesn't need a border, and the field set as well. Okay, we can just say that the borders are none instead of taking them away. Okay. Alright, so this is looking good so far. I'm just going to increase the margin bottom after each div to make it 50. So we have enough space to deal with whatever we want to deal with. Now let's see how can we make this looking like that, a little bit beautiful. Okay, so let's continue with this part. Now we want to take this outline and give this a background color of something gray like that, right? So let's just go back to the code here and say that this input text field is going to have the outline, but instead of none, I just forgot that for a moment, we can just say that the outline is 0, right? So that is going to, it doesn't show here, but I think it surely has an effect. So let me just wait here and look at this outline. Okay, we are going to have it have an effect, but for the time being, let's just make sure that the outline is 0, right? And let's give it a background color of E8. This is the color that I've used there, all right? And let's give it a color for the text to be, I don't know, let's just pick something gray as well. Okay, and let's pick the border to be colored as well. So the border is going to be 1 pixel solid and DDDD. Okay, looking good. Now the last bit is whenever you click, right, you want to see this shadow, and I think there is a slight, if you look closely, there is a slight border as well. The border changes, right, and there is a shadow. So let's see how can we do this, the shadow here. The shadow is a property called box shadow, and we can just search for it on the internet. Box shadow is generator. Okay, why isn't this working? I have no idea. Okay, so let's just go to CSS generator here, and let's see how do you want your shadow to be. Let's say that we want something to be from everywhere, so this is reflecting everywhere, I think, and to blur it a little bit more like that. And I think this is going to be 0. Okay, or 1. Okay, and let's pick the color to be something blue. We can change the color, that's fine, that's no big deal. And the opacity, you can just have it like this, and we will see if we want to change it or not. We don't want it to be inset, we want it to be external. So this is your rule here. So let's just take this, copy it. Alright, and notice that this shadow happens whenever you click. You don't hover, you click, and this click is a pseudo class called focus, right? So you've seen before the hover, now we talk about the focus. So whenever we stand on that element of type text and we focus or click on it, right, we want to have this kind of shadow here. So let's see this. Alright, it's looking really ugly, but what's really beautiful about the developer tools is that you can control that. So let me just inspect this, and you're gonna see that there is a, where is the focus one? Let me just search for it. It doesn't appear from there for some reason. So alright, so how about we make this, instead of focusing it, I'm just going to show you if we want to put this as like an all-time element or an all-time rule, so it's always there. I just want to show you how can you control this from the developer tools. See, this is the box shadow. Just click on this button and you're gonna see stuff that are really amazing. Okay, so click on this again. Now you can decide the orientation of your box shadow here. So just say that this is good enough for us, and the blur is going to be a little bit more, and this is the spread, and this is your new box shadow. So I'm just going to replace this with that one, with this values, and let's give it a color of our own choice with some transparency. Okay, it doesn't look that good still, but we are trying. Okay, so let us take a look at the orientation here. I think 6 is too much, so let's just make it 3. Alright, so I think this is it. Yeah. Okay, I'm going to pause the video to see how exactly did I do that. Alright, so it turns out this is the actual box shadow that I used for that activity. Okay, so let's take a look at how this is looking. Far more better. So what is the difference? We didn't make any offsets from X or the Y axes, right? And this is the blur of 5 pixels. I think the whole idea was the color. The color was something that is really light, right? So the whole idea was about the color, but try to play with it until you reach something that you really are satisfied of, right? And by the way, this is the blur, right? This is the blur, and this is the X offset, and this is the Y offset, and that's the color. It's just straightforward. Okay, so instead of having this as an all-time rule, I just want to apply it in order whenever we say focus or click on that element. So click, here you go. Now one last thing is to have a border. So let's say that the border here is going to be 1 pixel solid, and let us make the same color but something that is more deeper. So I'm just going to inspect this something that is more sharper. I think this is good, right? Now for the last bit of centering things in the middle, in the center of the screen. So I'm just going to start with the H1 here. So where's the H1? All right, so I'm just gonna say, because this is text by the end of the day, so text align center should do the trick. Now for the annoying part, let's do the one that you are familiar with, which is basically margin 0 auto, right? So how about we do margin 0 auto for this guy? So you're gonna grab the div itself, right? So this div here, you can take a look at the form, and or we can even go deeper. This is the field set, right? So we can grab the field set. See how the field set is having way too big margin to the right, right? So you can just grab that field set and just say margin 0 auto. So we can just say margin from top and bottom. I think we gave some kind of top and bottom. We didn't. All right, so you can just say from top and bottom 0 and auto. Okay, and this is going to center things in the middle. But now you are targeting every single field set, right? And honestly, if you watch the Flex video before this one, you would see that there is a more prettier way to do that. So I'm just going to remove that. If you are understanding this one, that's good. But notice that in this, you would be targeting every field set to do that. So instead, remember the container trick that I've told you about, right? So you can have a container trick, a container that contains all the divs, right? So if I do that, let's just go there and put a very big container div in front of every divs that we have. So this is going to be container, and I'm going to close this right at the end. Okay, so the container div is going to be having the following. So let's say that the container is going to be having the flexbox property, which is display flex, and the minute that you do that, you're going to see that all divs are going to be stacked in line. So you can change this really easily. You can just say that you would want to stack things, to change the flex direction to be column, and that's it, right? If you want to put things in the middle, in the center of the screen, so just say justify content center and align items center, and here you go. Okay, so this is another way to do it. If you want to grab every child element and give it that margin 0 auto, it's up to you. If you want to have like a parent container that you can talk to like directly instead of talking to the child, and give it a flex box. If you want to put things in line together, then you have the flex, and the property is by default of the flex direction is row. If you watch the previous video, right, you understand that. And if you want to have things stacked, like up on like above each other, so you can just change the flex direction into column, and that's it.